Where I'm Lawrence Parker. So before we do get started, let me just admit Lauren. Perfect. Before we do get started, I do want to make everyone aware we are recording this in the interest of time, and also because there are a few individuals who won't be able to attend this session, so we wanted to record it, so therefore they got a chance to at least see everything that happened, so they could at least be aware of the discussion and the conversation. Okay? Okay. Perfect. So our speaker today is the one, the only, my emotional mom, and she shares the name of my blood mother, Gwendolyn Reese. She's the president of the African American Heritage Association, which was responsible for creating the Heritage Trail that we have here in South St. Pete. She's also the co-chair of the Pinellas Remembrance Project, working to bring the Lynching Memorial Project down from Montgomery, Alabama, here to St. Petersburg. She's also the commissioner on the City Planning and Preservation Commission, and she wanted to, just speak to us a little bit today and just share some of the history of St. Pete, because like when it comes to St. Pete, a lot of us are fairly new here, and I know I myself, I've only been here for 2 years, so I don't even know a lot of the history of St. Pete. So as we want to be more aware with the coming times, is we're realizing that we don't really know the history of a lot of the things that have happened here. So as we learn the history, we can start to change some of that past for the future. So Miss Reese is here to share some of the past.
Namaste and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I really want to thank those of you who are choosing to let me see you or choosing to engage in the video, because it's really difficult for someone to speak and you're not seeing faces, you're seeing names or photos. So it's much more engaging if you are joining us via video. It's engaging for me, and I think it will be a lot more productive for you if you're able to do so. I've been asked to talk to you about the history of St. Petersburg, but more specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the African American presence in St. Petersburg. There are other places you can go and other speakers that you can have that can share with you the overall history of this city, but it's very seldom that you can find someone who is knowledgeable enough, and I don't know everything, who is committed to preserving, sharing, and educating others about the rich African-American presence in St. Petersburg. As Lawrence said, I'm president of the African American Heritage Association, and I believe it will be 6 years this coming August that we unveiled the African American Heritage Trail. I know Ronell is on this call, and we had originally scheduled a tour, a trolley tour for the chamber, for some department of the chamber to actually tour the trail, and then COVID-19 descended upon us. So that was not able to happen. And I'm really doing some rethinking. I'm not going back to the normal. I'm creating a new normal, as I hope most people are, because the normal was not the best. But in the new normal, I'm falling in love with Zoom and other things that I shunned before, but I really appreciate them now. And we're actually going to be developing a virtual tour so that people can still have that personal experience as they tour the trail. So the trail has 20 markers on it, and it tells a lot of the history, not the total history, but a lot of the history of the city. I think it's really important for us to know our history, whether it's American history or whether it's the history here in St. Petersburg, because all of you, and me too, but because I grew up in a segregated world and attended segregated schools, I found that my Black teachers were more prone to tell us or teach us about Black history, but even their knowledge was limited. So if we're truly going to learn, appreciate, understand the contributions of American history to this country, then we can't rely on any textbook. We're just not going to get the true story. We have to be adventurous enough, bold enough, and courageous enough to challenge the identity that you have or the history that you believe to find out about the true history. So I encourage everybody to do that. It's a wonderful experience. Once you start the journey, you cannot get off of it because you're learning so much. But let's talk about St. Petersburg. We have a rich history as well here. And it started in 1868. So the first African-American to come to what is now St. Petersburg, what is now Pinellas County, was John Donaldson. He was a formerly enslaved person. He came with a woman who was also formerly enslaved, and they came with their white employer. He did not own them. They were employed by him. And shortly after coming here, they married, had a large family. He acquired over 40 acres of land in the vicinity of 18th Avenue and 22nd Avenue, 31st Street to 34th Street. And he was very much a respected member of this very small community that would become St. Petersburg. He was a truck farmer and he sold produce. He also was the selected mail carrier at one time, and his children even attended the only school, and that was a school for white children. And that was very acceptable, and they had no problems. It was only when there was a larger influx of African Americans to the community, which happened around 1888, which was when workers were needed to build the Orange Belt Railway. So before the Orange Belt Railway, St. Petersburg was sand spurs and rattlesnakes and not much else. No sidewalks, hardly anything. And we can go back and look at pictures from that era, and you would have a hard time imagining that what we have now came from those very, very less than humble beginnings. But when it became, when it was recognized that St. Petersburg could be seen as a Mecca, it wasn't thought tourist town, but a Mecca for people from the north. It was then, how will they get here? And so the Orange Belt Railway was the only way that people could get here. And so African-American workers from North Florida and South Georgia and Alabama were recruited to come down and help build the Orange Belt Railway. After they completed that railway, many of them decided to stay and settle here. And that's when the racial problems began. That's when Jim Crow laws and other segregationist policies began, because then you had more than one Black family. You had an influx of African Americans. And even before redlining, which I hope most of you know about, African Americans were still forced to live in certain sections of the city. So little communities popped up all across the city. We have Methodist Town that was on the north side. We had Peppertown, which was just west of MLK. Cooperstown was just east of MLK, between 2nd and 3rd Avenue South. And there were other, and then there was the gas plant area. And the gas plant area is what you hear most about, because that was the area where African Americans were displaced in order to build Tropicana Field. And hopefully we'll get to talk about that. So as the Black population grew, so did racial terror, so did lynching. We had our first lynching on Christmas Day in 1905, and that was John Thomas. Our second, and these are documented, we're sure there are more lynchings, but these are the ones we've been able to document. John Evans, November 12th, 1914, and Parker Watson in 1924, May of 1924. And so Lawrence mentioned that I'm co-chair of the Pinellas Remembrance Project, and we are working with the Equal Justice Initiative and Brian Stevenson in Montgomery, Alabama. They opened up the Legacy Museum and the National Peace and Justice Memorial. And in there are over 4,000, and now it's up to 5,000 documented lynchings that occurred across the country. And instead of doing it by city, they did it by county. So when you go there, Pinellas County has a large monument. You can go to EJI website, and on our monument we have 2 lynchings, Parker Watson and John Evans, but we have documented John Thomas. And in talking with EJI about the content for our memorial, they also want us to include information about Ebenezer Tobin. Now, Tobin cannot be considered lynching as we usually think of it. Tobin was supposedly an accomplice of John Evans. He was jailed for a year. There was a trial. The jury found him guilty in 15 minutes, and he is documented as the first official and legal hanging in Pinellas County. So they want us to include that on the monument. If you want to know more about that, you can look up either Community Remembrance Project Coalition or Pinellas Remembers. We have a website and a Facebook page. And we are hoping to unveil our lynching memorial in November of this year. Because Parker Watson was lynched in November. Now, our memorial will go on the corner of 2nd Avenue South and MLK because that's the exact site of the lynching of John Evans. And we are working with the city of St. Pete, that city-owned property. So this is all coming together beautifully. We're educating the community. We will be having an essay contest in the fall for high school students, and we will be providing scholarships. So that's a part of what I do, but it's also very much a part of the history. Because when we talk about a history, there are dark sides to it too. But we must be aware of all of the history of not only this city, but of this country. So we did have racial terror lynching here. Now we're hearing all about riots. St. Pete had its own riots. The first one that was 1968. The sanitation strike, and 4 days of violence erupted. And I was 19 years old because I'm 71 now. And I remember the police department having an armored tank. They didn't own it, so I don't know if they borrowed it, leased it, or whatever, but I remember seeing the armored tank going down 22nd Street and 16th Street, spearing tear gas to disrupt people, and not always to disrupt people. So the city was sued by one family in particular for discharging tear gas into their home and causing distress for them and their children. The next riot that we talk about in St. Pete was in 1996. When Tyron Lewis, an unarmed Black teenager, was shot and killed by a police officer whose last name was Knight. And after that, for 2 days, there was quite a bit of rioting and destruction in October and then again in November. And just as we talk about justice across the country right now with all of these other shootings, that police officer was not disciplined and simply moved to another district in St. Pete to complete policing. So what we have to understand is the connection between history and today. So in St. Petersburg, the Black population grew, it prospered. And if any of you are aware of 22nd Street South, between 5th Avenue and 15th Avenue, known as the Deuces, that was Black St. Petersburg Central Avenue. Because we could shop in some of the stores downtown, but quite often you couldn't try on the clothes. You could not try on the shoes. You would have to buy them. And so we had a plethora of seamstresses and tailors because you would buy something, get home, it needed to be altered in order for you to wear it. And so oftentimes we have seamstresses make our clothes, but other times they were there to alter things that we could not try on and did not know that it did not properly fit. On that 10-block stretch of 22nd Avenue, which is called the Deuces, in the late 60s, there were 110, in a 10-block radius, 110 thriving Black-owned, Black-operated, and Jewish-owned businesses. 22nd Street was thriving. There was nothing you could not get on 22nd Street. There was the best barbecue in the Southeast United States, Geach's Barbecue. That mural is up on a wall there. If you go, it's on the northwest corner of 22nd Street and 9th Avenue. Lots of restaurants. We had 5 pioneering Black physicians. The All-Black Mercy Hospital was there. The Royal Theater, one of 2 Black theaters in town. The Manhattan Casino, which is a historic site, as many other buildings on 22nd Street. We've gotten historic designation. But the Manhattan Casino was a part of the Chitlin Circuit. C-H-I-T-L-I-N, not Chitterling, but Chitlin. And that was a circuit throughout the Southern United States where Black performers could play because they could not play in white venues. And so sometimes they were as fancy as the Manhattan, and sometimes it was like almost a wooden shack, but that's the only place that Black performers, and when I say Black performers, I mean people like Duke Ellington and Lena Horne, Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Washington, Ray Charles and James Brown, Cab Calloway. You cannot name Mahalia Jackson. All of these performers were often not able to play in white venues. And when they were able to, it was to a segregated audience. So there are times that there's a story that Duke Ellington came to town, and when he realized, and I think he was playing at the Coliseum finally, and when he realized the audience was all Black, he was infuriated. When he left there, he went to the Manhattan Casino and played all night free to the Black community because he was so angered that the Black folk could not come and see him at the Coliseum. But when we talk about 22nd Street, it's near and dear to our hearts. The Manhattan Casino was built by Elder Jordan, and he's one of the pioneers of St. Petersburg. And in fact, we have a life-size bronze statue that we were supposed to unveil in April, but because of COVID-19, I don't know if we're gonna have a virtual unveiling or whatever, but very soon on the east corner of the Manhattan Casino will be a life-size statue of Elder Jordan. Elder Jordan was also formerly enslaved. And when he came to St. Petersburg, he was quite an entrepreneur. He got into real estate. His sons were carpenters. They built some homes in the area. And he is said to be a self-made millionaire, according to those standards. Also, he donated the land for Jordan Park Elementary, and he built what is now the Manhattan Casino. It was called the Jordan Dance Hall at that time. And it was a place where the high school would have their graduation when we finally did get a high school. Other social activities would be held there. So it was like the cultural and social hub of the Black community. Now I want to tell you a story about Elder Jordan. It's folklore, but folklore is always composed of some truth and some fiction. But it is said, and it's been written in more than one book, that during the Great Depression, when I think St. Pete may have had 2 banks and they closed, that Elder Jordan loaned the city of St. Petersburg money. No one has been, and I didn't say a person, I said the city. No one has been able to document the exact amount, but it's been recorded in books. And so that's a part of the folklore and the history of St. Petersburg. So the Deuces was and still is a very important part of this community. The first school we had, and someone has to keep me up on the time, was Davis Academy, and it was in the area of Tropicana Field, and I do want to talk about Tropicana Field. That school was erected in 1914. It was the only school we had. In 1924, Jordan Park Elementary was built. It has historic designation, and it was immediately overcrowded. Up until 1924, Black folk, our education ended in 6th grade. There was no high school. There was no middle school. Gibbs High was built in 1927, named after Jonathan C. Gibbs, who was the first Black Secretary of Education for the state of Florida in the 1800s during Reconstruction. The school now is no longer known as Gibbs, but the sign says Jonathan C. Gibbs, because we want people to know it. The school is named after a person with historic significance. When that school opened, it was a middle school, well, what we call junior high and high school. And so at that point in 1927, African Americans were able to graduate from high school locally. Before that, if your parents were middle class or somewhat affluent, teachers, doctors, you were usually sent away to a boarding school in order to complete your education. And then we have Mercy Hospital. And I'm not going to be able to tell you everything, so I'm going to recommend a couple of books. One you can't find. The other is Tombola bookstore has found a way to have copies of both of these books. One is called St. Petersburg's Historic 22nd Street, and the other is called St. Petersburg's Historic African American Neighborhoods. These are the absolute best books on the history of the African American presence in St. Petersburg, if you're interested in knowing. Also, for about 3 years, I've written a column for the Weekly Challenger, which is the Black newspaper. It's primarily digital now. So if you go to theweeklychallengernewspaper.com, you can pull up the digital issues. And for a long time, I wrote a column entitled I Am, and it focused on a significant African-American person in our community or an event. So I have some I Am Mercy Hospital, so you can learn about Mercy Hospital. I am Elder Jordan. I am Dr. Wimbish. I am Dr. Bob Swain. And so that's a wonderful way to learn about the history through significant people and personalities. Bob Swain was an incredible person. He was my dentist, but he also sued the city of St. Pete to break through the redlining barriers that they had. So at one time, if you were to ever go down 22nd Street to 15th Avenue, Black people could live on the north side of 15th Avenue, but they could not cross the street and live on the south side. On our marker, there's actually a copy of the city charter that said we could not live right across the street on the south side of 15th Avenue. Dr. Swain sued the city and built his dental office, which still stands and has historic designation on that south side of 15th Avenue, which then opened up 15th Avenue for Black people to then begin to move further south. So we have a wonderful history. There are great things that have been done here. Great people have come here. The sanitation strike of 1968 took place in May. Dr. Martin Luther King was killed on Thursday, April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, there to assist the sanitation workers. It said that he was planning to come to assist our sanitation workers, and he was assassinated. Our strike started in May, but his brother, A.D. King, did come to St. Pete, as well as Dr. Ralph Abernathy, and they came in support of our sanitation workers, and they were on strike from May until August of 1968. So we've had our share of civil rights, not the bombings in Birmingham, not the killings that took place in many other states, but we have our lynchings. We have had our civil rights disturbances. And right now, if you've been reading the paper, there's some dissension on the part of an organization regarding the fact that we are now ready to put a plaque on the blank wall in City Hall. That article was written by Waveney Ann Moore. In January, I went in front of City Council and asked for a plaque that we had asked for over 22 years ago. And then 4 years ago, I chaired a committee where once again, they were considering putting another mural up and covering up that blank wall. So in January of this year, I went back before City Council asking them to vote once again to not leave the wall blank, but to put a plaque up telling the story of why it's blank. If in the event you do not know, in December of 1966, Joseph Waller, now known as Mahalia Jackson, ripped a racist mural off the walls of City Hall. That mural had been there since the 1920s. It was done by George Snow and he was a WPA muralist. And for those of you who aren't aware of WPA, that is something that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt started as a way to help employ people during the Great Depression. So you had a lot of WPA workers doing varied things throughout the country, but George Snow was a muralist. And so he was commissioned to build a mural. And I'm gonna say, excuse me for just 1 minute, that is my doorbell. I'll apologize.
No worries. All right. So everyone, I want you to notate any questions. We'll take this as a moment to take a brief kind of break. Notate any questions that you have. I've noticed a few people put some links down in the chat. Any questions that you have, any comments, feel free to just put them in the chat and I'll ask Ms. Reese at the end and we'll try to see if we can get any of the questions asked. We'll try to take 5 to 10 minutes at the end. But yeah, so far, so good. And hence we continue.
I apologize. When you're working from home, you may hear my dog barking. I put her upstairs. The doorbell's ringing. You don't know what it is, so my apologies. I want to tell you a little bit more about that wall, and then I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to open it up for questions, because I believe the learning experience is enriched when there's dialogue as opposed to someone speaking. But because the wall is so relevant to us right now, I want you to understand what occurred there. That was a very racist mural that depicted Black people in a derogatory way, with long, elongated faces, huge lips, and they were entertaining white people at Pasadena Beach. And there was a watermelon somewhere in the front of the mural. And so Black folk had asked the city to consider taking it down because it was humiliating and denigrating, and they just laughed and never did. There's even a quote, I think it was Herman Goldner, who was the mayor at that time, and his quote in the St. Pete Times, now the Tampa Bay Times, was, "I walk by that mural every day and I'm not offended by it." And so that gives you an idea of the mindset. In the 1960s, of course, he was not offended by it. It was not denigrating to white people. It was denigrating to Black people. So one day, Joseph Waller Mahalia Jackson was in City Hall, and as he was leaving in anger, he looked up at the mural, ripped it off the wall, rolled it up, walked down Central Avenue carrying it, went to prison, lost his voting rights. His voting rights have been restored. That will be 54 years in December. So 4 years ago, under this mayor, current mayor, they wanted to hang a mural once again, but we've always asked to leave it Black. Putting up a mural will cover up the history. The story will disappear. No one will know. So at this point, I helped to draft the content of what will go on the plaque. It passed the City Planning and Preservation Commission. I believe the next step is to go to the City Council. And then at that point, a mural will be placed on that wall. The purpose is so that major part, that very significant part of our city's history, that was an event that reignited the civil rights movement in St. Petersburg, so that when we're dead and gone, those of us who were here at that time, the history will live on. And it's very important that we begin to observe and preserve and tell our history. So there's so much more that I could talk to you about. So consider this an introduction. And I invite you to go further by either getting these two books and reading them, checking out our website, the African American Heritage Association website, checking out the Pinellas Remembers website about the lynching. I encourage you to walk the trail. I mean, it's safe to walk the trail right now, as long as you social distance and you're not in crowds. It is a walking tour that you can do on your own. It's much richer if you have a guide, but unfortunately, you're not going to have a guide right now. So let's open it up to questions or comments or observations or anything. Oh, let me say one other thing that's really important, the Trop site, history of Trop site. From Sean King to everyone. So Sean, are you asking me to give some history? Okay, so thank you, because I wanted to, and so thank you for the reminder. Has there been any current resistance with the process of getting the plaque? History of the green benches. Let me try to do this. Sean, hold on 1 minute. Let me go to current resistance. Yes, and the resistance is coming from the person who tore the mural down. And that's Mahalia Jackson with the Uhuru movement. So you can read, I'm not gonna take time. You can read about that in the paper. He held a press conference on Monday. He is opposed, I have no idea why, but this is really not about him. We're not trying to commemorate him. It's about preserving the history of the event and how it was so significant to our history. So let's go to the Trop site. Thank you, Sean. I'm actually working with a team of people. We're on the Bloomberg Harvard travel team. That's a part of a project that the mayor has. He was one of 40 mayors selected from around the world to come to Bloomberg Harvard with a problem in his city that he wanted to tackle. Our mayor chose the redevelopment of Tropicana Field because he knew that it would be a sensitive issue based on the history. And the atrocities that were committed there for the sake of building the Trop. So we traveled to New York and we're back and we're working now even through COVID-19. And part of what we're doing, Sean and others, is we're planning listening sessions, virtual for now, throughout the city. And we want to listen to what people would like to see in that redevelopment, but we also want to tell people the history because so many people are new to this community or they're too young to know. So please don't ask me the year. I am a historian, but I am in my culture a griot. A griot is a storytelling historian. But when the Tropicana Field was built, initially, when the land was acquired and what was proposed to the city, that was a site was going to be created there that would be a site for light industry. So it would provide jobs, it would provide better housing. And so even though Black folk didn't want to lose their homes, this was seen as improvement. By the way, the same thing sort of happened in Methodist Town, but that's a different conversation. So Black people, in the name of progress, embraced this idea of light industry and better housing. The city talked about that for just a couple of years, and then it flipped to, we want to build a baseball stadium. Now, there are many of us, I'm very bold and I can be tactful when I choose to, and when it's not necessary, and when it's more meaningful for me not to be, I will not be. So I'm not being tactful. The city lied to us. Some people say it was a smoke screen, but they lied to us because if you go back further in history, you will see where there had always been talk about building a baseball field. St. Peter's had baseball fever since the 30s or more. So all of the land was acquired. There were hundreds of homes. There were 8 churches, lots of businesses, and all of these people were displaced. So we're talking I grew up in the gas plant area. I grew up on 5th Avenue South at 1305. So the avenue coming down the side is 5th Avenue. It was a rich, vibrant, thriving, yet deprived because of Jim Crow and racism community. But it was a community that we took pride in. It was safe. It was nurturing, and I'm a product of that community. So people were just displaced and sent everywhere. So the sense of community was totally lost. And so then Tropicana Field was built. There was no baseball team, but they built it with the hope of getting one. And it took quite a few years to get one. So I'm gonna tell you a story. Back in the day when the New York Yankees and the Cardinals would come here for spring practice, once again, Dr. Wimbish, Dr. Swain, and the NAACP sued the city because Black ball players could not stay in the hotels with white ball players. So they stayed in the homes of Black people. Dr. Swain built an apartment to house them, and then he realized his complicity with racism, and they decided to sue the city. They sued the city and won, but the hotel still refused to allow the Black ball players to stay there. So those teams packed up and left St. Petersburg. But let's move forward. So St. Pete now wants a baseball team, but guess what? The first Black commissioner of Major League Baseball played on one of those teams that had done spring training here. And it is said that he said, no proof, although he talks about how racist St. Petersburg was in his biography, but it said, he said, over my dead body will they get a team. That's the most racist city I've ever seen. Nobody can prove he said that, but it took years for them to finally get a baseball team. So people were displaced, a community was destroyed, all based on what was initially a lie. So when you hear people say, something is owed to the African American community. Whatever happens in the redevelopment there should be inclusive of the African American community. That is why you're hearing that, because of that history. Let me switch real quick to the green benches. Sean, type in a question if I didn't give you enough. The green benches was something St. Petersburg was very proud of. They had postcards with the green benches lined up and down Central Avenue. They faced each other, so they were back to back, so they faced each other. When you see the pictures, people are sitting on them, children are playing in front of them, but you will never see an African American sitting on them because we could not sit on the benches. Now, it was not a written law, but it was an unwritten law, and the police would remove you if you did. So those green benches were not for our enjoyment at all. So when the green benches were finally removed years ago, they were brought back once, and they were painted pastel colors because people thought, oh, this is such a rich part of our history, let's bring them back, but let's not paint them green. And so I think they were pink, yellow, blue, maybe orange. It just didn't work. So if you go into Lonnie's Sandwich Shop on Central Avenue, there is a poster on the wall that I would love to own. And it goes from the green bench, and then it has, then it goes to the pastel benches. So it kind of shows you the history of from green benches to pastel benches, and that didn't work. So somewhere along the line, somebody decided the green bench florist, the green bench brewery, the green bench something else, and the green bench newsletter, and Chick-fil-A put a green bench out in front of its store on 4th Street, and this business near on Central Avenue near the underpass put a green bench out. And so people often don't understand. If you don't know the history, you will not realize that what is a wonderful memory to one set of people is not a wonderful memory to others. So a lot of white people have fond memories about the benches. African Americans do not, because we were only able to walk past those benches. We could not sit on them. Am I out of time? Okay, what can we do as a St. Pete, what can we do as a young professional community? Let me text my grandson in Colorado, let him know I can't talk right now. What can you do? There's so much you can do. One is to learn about the history. One is to learn more about yourselves. So that takes a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self-assessment. It takes being courageous enough to confront your implicit biases, because you do have them. We all have them. If you're human, you have biases. You can't help it. You know, you have a favorite color, that's a bias. You have a favorite food, that's a bias. You have a favorite car, that's a bias. So we have biases, but some of them are deeper and affect how we interact, how we think of other people. So one of the things that I suggest is that you become more self-aware. It starts with you. One of the ways to do this is to take an implicit association test, IAT, from Harvard University. It's online. Look up IAT at harvard.edu. It's a series. When I do training, that's a prerequisite. Before I will come into an organization and do a training, their staff must take an IAT test. I require the one that deals with race and ethnicity, and then I ask you to choose others. Now these tests cover everything from weight, because a lot of us have biases about obese people. It covers all kinds of topics, but the point is for you to become aware, and thank you, Lauren, for putting it up in the chat room. It's important for you to become aware of your own biases. They will shock you. When I first took the one, it shocked me. Oh, it said I had a bias for white people and against Black people. Very small, but I'm like, no, no. I've been doing anti-racism training for 40 years. There's no way I'm biased towards white people. And then I realized I was born and raised in America. That is, racism is embedded in the very fabric of this country. It was a part of this country before the founding of America. It started with Christopher Columbus discovering a country that was already inhabited and had its own culture. And another thing I'd like to share with you is the doctrine of discovery. I will not go into it, but please look it up. And it was something issued by the Pope that gave Europeans the right to go out and confiscate land and to enslave people if they were pagans and not Christians. So that doctrine of discovery is still alive and well today. And it is thought that sometimes it's used in the acquisition of rainforests and other sacred lands in the name of progress and in corporate greed. So, but implicit, the test there will help you understand your biases. And so I realized, yeah, I'm biased. I mean, everybody's biased, but around the issues of ethnicity and color, if you were born and raised in America, you have biases regardless of your ethnicity. And so I had to, accept that too. So that's the first step. You cannot do anything outside of yourself if you don't know yourself. So you'll be out there thinking you're doing good and your implicit biases will be coming through, and you're not even aware of them, and you're offending people, and you're saying, I was in a group with Capra University, and this person said, and Miss Reese, you will appreciate this colored man, and I'm like, no, he didn't say that. I know he didn't say that. And he kept talking, but I could tell that his intent was good. There was not I could tell from what he was saying and his tone, and I'm like, maybe I didn't hear that right. And then he said something else, and he said colored people. And I said, oh, I heard it right. And then I saw the faces of my Capra, and I'm the only African-American in my Capra University class. And I saw the faces of the other white people. I'm like, yeah, he did say that. So when I got a chance to talk, I said, this is a teachable moment. I said it to him with love, but I said calling us colored people is derogatory. He was from Puerto Rico, and he was shocked. Because his intent was not that. But I said, I need to tell you this, because if you say this in other company, people will be highly offended. And so he said, but what should I say? Black is okay. Black is okay. Yes, Black is okay. African-American, yes. Realize every Black person's not African-American. They may be African Jamaican. They may be African Haitian. Okay, so be careful. African-American is specifically for those born and raised in America. Black is every person of African descent throughout the diaspora, so you're safer saying Black. I told him you can even say people of color, a person of color. You just can't say colored person and colored people. That comes from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so he understood. But that's what I'm saying, unless you are interested in becoming more self-aware, then don't step out and try to do anything in the community to make it better. The first thing you do is to learn about yourself, so that when you step out there, you're less likely to be offensive, or many of the other things that can happen when we are, forgive me for using this word, quote, being a do-gooder. Ibram Kendi and quite a few other Black authors and speakers have said, I'm more afraid of a white liberal than I am of a white racist. And I'll let you stew on that and try to figure out why that comment would be made, but I totally agree with them. I have more concerns around a white liberal than I have around a white racist. At least with a white racist, I know exactly where I stand. With the white liberal, sometimes I can be caught off guard and something comes out that is totally shocking, totally offensive, but I didn't expect it because this person claims and thinks that they are liberal and open-minded. So, you know, sometimes people say things like, I'm colorblind. No, you're not, and nobody appreciates hearing that. I don't see color. You cannot help but see color, and I want you to see my color. So when you start doing self-evaluations and self-assessments, you can understand some of the things that you say, your intention may be good, but the impact is not. So I do a training called intention versus impact, and that's very important. So what's the best way to share information while being sensitive to the trauma? Tara, where are you? Tara, may I ask your ethnicity?
I believe she might have dimmed her screen there. Oh, there she is.
Okay, so Tara, may I ask your ethnicity? I don't choose to think I can answer it just by looking at your face. You may look one way and not be. What's your ethnicity, Tara?
I'm white.
Okay, so the reason I ask is that you have to be very careful about sharing the history of a people that you are not a part of. So you have to do it in a way that is very sensitive, and I understand that. So one of the things, and I'm sure I'm running out of time, but there was this white man who had the best of intentions. And he borrowed all of my books, and I have tons of books over here. He wanted to learn about the Black community. And then we were in a meeting together where most of the audience was African-American. The issue was African-American, and he chose to speak up on behalf of African-American people. And I was offended, as everyone was in the room. So our thing is, if African Americans are present, let us tell our own story. If we're not present, then we appreciate our story being told, but always being told with the disclaimer, this is not my story, this is not my experience, this is what I've learned, and this is what I want to share. So in that way, Tara, I think it's very appropriate to share, but always be sure that what you're sharing is factual. And so that's why it's important to do a lot of reading to learn about the history. But when it's told by a person that's not Black, by prefacing it with, this is not my story, this is not my history, this is not my experience, but it's a story that must be told, and I'm going to do my best to tell it accurately, then I think any mistakes that are made will be forgiven. Does that answer your question, Tara?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Do you have recommendations for resources? Da 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 da. And speaking of shopping, where did you get your glasses? Okay, I'm known for my glasses. I have about 20 pairs of glasses. These and most of the others come from this incredible retro antique store on Central Avenue called the Lion's Paw. And they specialize in fact, when they first started, they had like one rack. And I started buying, and now they have 3 cases. And so when I was featured in the Tampa Bay Times Magazine, I gave them a shout out. But they carry one-of-a-kind designer glasses that are just wild. So the Lion's Paw on Central Avenue. I will send Lawrence a list of resources and books and other things for those who are interested. I'll send you books too. For instance, Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Dr. Charles Dew's book, The Making of a Racist. Dr. Charles Dew is a friend of mine. He's a professor at Brown, but he grew up in St. Petersburg, and he's white. He's 10 years older than me, so he was even more deeply embedded in the Jim Crow. Also, Ibram Kendi wrote Stamped from the Beginning. If you want to have what would I call it, a more accurate portrayal of American history that does not leave out the dark parts. There are quite a few other books that I can reference, and I'll send that to Lawrence. And so please go forward. Have you had a chance to review the latest plan? No, I haven't. I haven't had a chance to review the latest plan on Tangerine Plaza. What would I think about moving? I don't like to answer questions when I haven't given it a lot of thought, but I work with a lot of the municipal employees and end up down there in that building because the department that oversees the Community Planning and Preservation Commission, which I'm a part of, I think sometimes that it is a good idea to bring services to the community as opposed to expecting the community to come to you. So the municipal building down there, you either go in that parking garage or more than likely you put money in a parking meter on Central Avenue and you drive up and down finding a parking space. There will be no parking problem at Tangerine Plaza. That's an incredibly large building. It's not that old. It can be a perfect place for municipal employees, particularly if services like paying your water bill and other things are housed there. You know, Rick Baker, former Mayor Rick Baker used to talk about a seamless community. Well, I think that may be another step in making this more a seamless community by bringing services that have never historically and have never been housed in the Black community into the community, which means that white people will also have to come into the community. And I guarantee you, there would be many people coming to that Tangerine Plaza facility that may never have been on the south side of town. Okay, so did I answer all the questions? And if I have more time, I don't know. It tells me that it's, what time?
We had you scheduled from 12 to 1, Miss Reese.
I have how many more minutes?
7. We had you scheduled from 12 to 1.
Okay,
but,
any other questions? I know I went really fast and I've learned to talk fast because I have so much to say in such a short time. But any questions from anybody? How to get people past Three Daughters south on 22nd? Sean, I think you can answer that better than I can. But I think it's a wonderful idea. And sometimes the one time I know people come south is when Art Walk takes place. And on that, what is that, first Saturday, first Friday, whatever Friday that is, second Friday, and people get on the trolley. But you know, for a long time, Terry Lipsy Scott told me that people wouldn't get off the trolley and come into the museum. So I'm gonna ask you, how many of you have ever been to the Dr. Carter G. Woodson African American Museum? Okay, start there. I'm gonna say, you wanna know what you can do, go to the museum. Right now you can't because of COVID-19, but that's a wonderful place to start. And so one of the ways to start is to go to the Black community. There's nothing to be afraid of. Go to Lorene's on 22nd Street. Ronell, help me with this, has some of the best seafood that you could ever want. I mean, there's some great, what's the Chief Creole's Cafe is, you know, a good place. I don't know what's gonna happen with, oh, and I love that restaurant at the bottom of the Manhattan. What's the name of it? Callaloo. So I'm not sure, but I love Callaloo. And so, you know, patronize some of the businesses when there are activities. How many of you ever heard of the Collard Green Festival that happens in February? Okay, so this was the second year. Go to the Collard Green Festival. It's incredible. So one of the ways to learn more is to take advantage of opportunities and some of the festivals that happen in the African American community. You're safe. Nothing's gonna happen to you. We're not violent. We're lots of fun, lots of good food, you know, and you can get to immerse yourself in a culture, and you can get to dissipate some of the fear or the uncomfortableness that we all have about people who are different from us. That's normal. We have that discomfort. You know, we have that fear. But you know what? White people, Black people have had to deal with that fear all of our lives. You know what, white people? Black people are often the only Black person in a group. I've been the only Black person too many times in my life. When I went through Leadership St. Pete, I was the only Black person in my whole class. Okay, so we have to be uncomfortable all the time. It's okay. to be uncomfortable. That's where growth occurs. Nothing happens when you're in your comfort zone. It's only when you're pushed out of your comfort zone that you grow. So take a chance. You won't be the only white person at the Collard Green Festival. I promise you, there are quite a few white people there. You won't be the only white person at Chief Creole's. His clientele is more white than Black. So take a chance and get on out there. And I don't know, Sean, we need to talk about that. And you need to talk to Beatrice Farrell, which is with the 22nd Street Redevelopment Corporation, because that's really part of what we'd like to do. Just come on, folks, just walk 4 more blocks down the street and see what happens. So I think we're out of time almost. I want to tell you that this has been great. Thank you for, I hope I answered everybody's question. Okay. So you have time for one question, comment, and I'm thick-skinned. You can give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, a thumbs down if you didn't. I'm good. Either way.
Loved it.
Thank you.
Loved it. Thank you so much, Ms. Reese. We appreciate it.
Okay. You all stay safe and stay sane through this COVID-19. And I've been sheltering in place for 4 months now. Don't plan to come out because some people are being crazy and the numbers are going back up. So I'm staying home. Be safe, be sane. Have a wonderful day.
All right. You as well. Thank you, Ms. Reese. You have a wonderful day.
I'm leaving.
Right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay.